and we're going to tell you a little bit about testing and measures of job performance. Alright, so I'm going to talk to you about integrity tests, and employee theft is a really big problem in a lot of businesses in America these days. It's the growing cost to American business, and it's a lot of employers, and I'm already off. The use of surveys of applicants and employees help estimate that 5% of the workforce engage in theft. A study determined a much higher rate of 58%. Survey was used for employees in high theft businesses like fast food restaurants and convenience stores. Two of the forms of testing that they use to prevent this issue is polygraph testing and paper and pencil honesty and integrity tests. This is what they use to nip this in the bud. A polygraph is a lie detector, which a lot of people are familiar with. It measures the psychological responses of individuals that accompany verbal responses. They're now illegal due to the act of the Polygraph Protection of Employees Act. Three types of physical data readings are electrodermal channel, cardio channel, and respiratory channel. The purpose of this data is to provide the examiner with information about the examinee's physiological reactions during questioning. The assumption is that the examiner can detect lying by observing the changes in the subject's response pattern. The procedures are in the pretest that's conducted, they make sure that the employee understands the wording of the questions and that they must answer yes or no. The actual exam rereads the questions so they already know what the questions are, and they have to they ask the question once or twice to make sure that they're going to get reliable information. Three types of questions are non-emotional, like are you 6 feet tall? Emotional control is have you ever tried to escape punishment by lying? And the behavior of interest, that just focuses on actual theft questions. The polygraph operator looks for evidence of disturbance in the readings. When the employee is lying, there should be a disturbance that is more intense than to the other questions. Employees can trigger emotional responses by other reactions besides guilt. So, lability is the autonomic threshold that differs from individual to individual. The Employee Polygraph Protection Act of 1988 was enacted to prevent employees to be labeled by failing the polygraph test. Most people were failing because they weren't actually, they were false negatives or false positives. Paper and pencil honesty tests are a little bit different. They were enacted because the polygraph testing became illegal. There's two types. A lot of people fake on these tests. I'm sure a lot of people have already taken these tests when they were applying for a job. There's always a concern that applicants may be lying, and when they're directly asked about theft, they're more likely to distort their responses. One study instructed a set of subjects to distort their answers on the test, and the other to answer honestly. This was to help those who distorted their answers did better than those who didn't, but the actual job applicants did the best overall. Individuals can distort their answers and score higher, and some applicants use distortion to a greater degree than others. Validity coefficients were found on actual job applicants making their test valid, and distortion by future job applicants will not be great enough to make the test invalid. So they concluded that the tests actually were, that they weren't, most people, if they lie on the test, that they would, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has commended the integrity test should not be considered. So anyway, how many people in here have taken integrity tests to get a job, or a lot of people have had to take these tests, I know. A lot of the bigger companies, I took one for TD Bank and Macy's, a lot of them incorporate them on their online testing. So overall, we talked about how employee theft is a big problem. Polygraph testing and paper and pencil testing have been used to stop this problem. So. And Joe's going to talk to you about drug testing.
Hey, I'm going to talk to you about drug testing. So basically, drug and alcohol use. When employers use it, this has been a problem since the 1960s. During the test, during this time period, drug testing has been increasingly common within the organization. Research has been found that drug tests negatively associates with mainly withdrawal behavior, such as too many breaks or sleeping on the job from drug or alcohol use, I guess. Questions related to drug tests. First, it's asked you 2 questions. Often each drug was used during the preceding 12 months. The first question asks the use of the drug, and the second question asks how often the respondent took each drug in order or got high from it. The answer was to understand, was understood as the measure of impairment. So big thing here is use and impairment. Keep in mind that there is a distinction between the two. Use means that some amount of the drug has been consumed. Impairment means that the amount consumed was enough to cause a decline in performance. In the types of drugs, there are 5 different drug tests that can be used. Paper and pencil, the urine, hair, fitness or duty, and the oral. Most common is definitely the urine test, and then probably the cheapest would be paper and pencil test, which is the simplest and least controversial. Similar to the paper and pencil integrity test, overt type tests ask directly about drug users with questions such as the following. This is probably a good, one of the most commonly used tests, and then urine tests are definitely the most common. Most drugs are found in your urine. If less than a threshold amount is detected, they count it as not being a drug in your system. Also, there's a hair test, which is similar to the urine test. It has to go through 2 screenings, actually. So it goes through the screening and then a confirmation test as well. This allows for longer detection within the hair that you can tell from, that just stays in your hair longer than others. Fitness for duty test. This test is relatively new and not often used. It's like a computer game. It's 2 minutes eye-hand coordination that tests your previous tests from their results. And the oral fluid test is just getting a swabbing the insides of your mouth, putting it in a seal, sending it off, and then getting it back. These are the most accurate tests, supposedly. And then issues. Detection of drugs does not determine amount used, frequency of use, time passed since use, impairment of the individual, reasonableness of threshold for detection. So basically, it doesn't give you all the information you need. Legal issues. So the major legal questions about drug tests. These can come up because when giving a drug test, it's most people don't want to. It's either takes time out of the day. These are some more questions or things that can come up, and people just usually don't want to do it, or maybe they do drugs and just kind of scared, don't want to get the test, so they come up with legal issues in order to not take them. And then when to use drug testing programs. Drug testing is accepted when an advance warning is given and rehabilitation rather than termination. So basically don't terminate the employee, just tell them and give them feedback and help them out with the problem. Guidelines for drug testing programs: obtain written consent before testing and provide the test results afterward. Both screening and confirmation tests are required for hair and urine tests. All tests test all individuals in the same job status and ensure that privacy is afforded to individuals being tested. So for the new and you, I never got a drug test for my job, but I do work at Urban Engineers in the HR department, and basically we have to, well, they give out urine tests, I guess, and they have to go to a doctor in order to get it. To sum up what I've been talking about, it's just drug testing, the history, use and impairment, the differences, types of drug tests, accordingly to the chemical tests, legal issues, when the drug testing is accepted, and guidelines for drug testing programs. And now, it's your
Hi everybody, I'm going to be talking to you actually about graphology. I kind of consider it to be the boring part of the presentation, but so bear with me, it's not that many slides. So graphology is the analysis of an individual handwriting in order to infer a person's trait, a personality trait or behavior tendency. The graphologist is the individual who actually performs the analysis. Alright, the analysis of handwriting features. So although different graphological approaches exist, most of them analyze following features of handwriting by the size of the letters, the pressure, the slant, the stroke, the width, the margin, the zones like the top, middle, and bottom, the connection of the letters, the regularity of letters formation, the form of connections, the line of letters. Analysis of handwriting features. When giving a writing sample, the sample should be a full page or a more spontaneous writing. It's either in your art. It should be made with a ballpoint pen or a pencil on an unrolled paper. The general procedures for graphoanalysis is based on the following steps. First, there's a perspectogram that's developed. Is the analysis of 100 upstrokes that occur in the writing sample according to the set rules of measurement. The result is a percentage value of each of 7 different degrees of slant, ranging from far forward to markedly backwards. Each slant is thought to indicate a state of emotional responses. For example, a fall forward is, don't remember. So this is actually an example of different handwritings. One is like the mental proneness. The second is the approach to achievement. The third is the level of honesty. And the fourth is the level of determination. I can't hardly really see that word, but that's an example of the different handwritings of how you can kind of tell which is which. The validity of graphology and selection. A few studies of validity of the technique in selection has concluded that graphoanalysis has no validity in the selection itself. One of the studies that was given compared 24 students against actual graphologists, and the conclusion has determined that it doesn't matter if you actually have been trained in that field or not. You really can't tell whether a person, you really can't tell from handwriting whether a person actually achieves what you're looking out for. So the evidence to date does not seem to warrant the use of graphology as a selection instrument. The studies that were done in small samples, so it was hard to judge validity with a smaller sample. But it is true that these type of tests are not really used for job applicants. So, me personally, I don't really have a certain set of actual handwriting. I kind of write how the way I feel. So a test like that wouldn't really show in my personality whatsoever, because if I'm rushing, I write one way. If I'm constantly slowing down, I write another way. So it's kind of like a pointless test to me. And I guess a lot of people can see that as a pointless test as well to them, since it's not used that much in the job application field. Summary, so when we talked about handwriting, we talked about whether it was a valid type of form of job application. We talked about graphologists and their field. We also talked about the different types of handwriting, what they all represent, what they all mean, and the different selections that they're under. And that's it. But it's not going to the next slide.
All right, they talked to you about different tests that are used to determine whether a candidate is best qualified for a job. I want to talk to you about testing to see if HR and management are hiring the right candidates. Measures of job performance are the main purpose is to serve as a criteria measure in validation studies. Which job performance measures can be used in validation and their appropriate characteristics? Is a question that we'll be answering. There are four different types of job performance measures. The first is production data. That goes with quality and or quantity of the output. HR personnel, which deals with absenteeism and turnover. Production data consists of the results of work. Data comprised of things that are counted, seen, and compared directly one worker to another. The most desirable type of measure, and it's because it's easy to gather this data. Measures are based on specific nature of job tasks. Data about quantity and quality production use. Quantity is the number of units a person produces within a week, a month. And quality is the quality of the product, is how good, number of defects, errors, and so on. So here's a few examples of production data. If you're a professor, said quantity may be the number of student credit hours taught. Quality may be the rating by students on what they learned, like what you filled out earlier. Variables used in HR personnel data are absenteeism, turnover, grievances, accidents, and promotions. They're collected as a part of other HR data files and on an individual basis. Absenteeism, the number of separate instances that you're absent, the total number of days, the number of short absences and long weekends. Problem with this is it's hard to determine which are voluntary and involuntary absences. Turnover measures the permanent separation from the organization. Obviously there's two types: involuntary termination by the organization, or fired, or voluntary, you quit, resign, despite the opportunity for continued employment. The other ones are grievances, employee complaints against management. Large number indicates poor treatment or inferior management decisions. Accidents, they want to see how much time's lost, damage to equipment and money, car accident, what it's costing the company, and did the workers' carelessness cause the accident. And promotions, they want to see how far you've gone vertically, it measures your career progress. Training proficiency, measure of employees' performance immediately following the completion of training. It's seldom used, but it's very desirable because why measure training proficiency? The validity generalization studies found that training proficiency demonstrates higher validities than measures of job performance. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission states that it's perfectly legal. There's three measures. Judgments are made by a training instructor about trainees, how well trainee mastered training or other parts. Scores on paper and pencil tests, match between topic coverage and test questions. And scores on a sample test replicate the major tasks of the job. Individual familiar with the work of another is required to judge on this work. Usually obtained by using a numerical rating scale or good, better, could use improvement kind of thing. Usually evaluated by a supervisor or manager. HR specialists and managers are sometimes skeptical of this data because it relies on opinions, and basically anything can happen there sometimes. Four most common traits, this is judgmental data. The four most common forms of rating scales are trait rating scales, which is the worst, the simple behavior scale, which is better, BARS or BES is even better, and CARS, which is the most promising, uses job behaviors to rate performances, but is specifically designed to use computer technology to do this testing. So that wraps it up. Is there any questions? All right, thank you.
All right. Go away for a minute.